Microbes-Mind is both about the problem of infinite regress, whatever begat life, and about what we took for granted, whatever begat that assumption. I've had a long-standing interest in innovation networks, and so about 10 years ago when I started work at NASA, I thought of the origin of life as an interesting case study potentially of an innovation network. And I thought I'll just work on this for a year or two and maybe get a fascinating case study of this. So here I am a decade later, and my challenge in preparing this talk was how not to be tempted to follow any of the myriad paths I could take that would end me up in enormous detail, because I want to get to the punchline, which is why I think the origin of life is a fascinating exemplar of an innovation network, a prime example of the origin of novelty, which can teach us a lot about the creative process in general and about our own creative problem-solving methods. So I'm going to focus on 4 key ideas which most of us have taken for granted and which the origin of life suggests we need to take out of the box and re-examine. The first one is pattern recognition. We tend to assume that pattern recognition is a manifestation of intelligence. But what the origin of life suggests is that pattern recognition may be a fundamental defining attribute of life. Collaboration. I sent an early copy of this manuscript to a friend at NASA Ames in computer science, and he wrote back, "You know, Zann, I disagree with the way you use the word collaboration. I argue that robots cannot collaborate. Agents cannot collaborate. They're not conscious." Now, we have some artificial intelligence experts in this room who might conceive that you might have an agent with deliberative capacities, able to look ahead and see that it would be in its competitive self-interest to collaborate. But that's not what I mean. What I think the origin of life suggests is that collaboration is a fundamental dynamic that was necessary not only for the origin of life, but for its advancement toward complexity. The third term, design, again, I think we need to pull design out of the box. There have been lots of studies of scientific method, but insufficient study of design method, which I think we need to address some of the hard problems that we face today. And so I'm going to suggest that the hijacking of the term design by the intelligent design community has left us without any word to express some fundamental principles and dynamics that we need in order to understand some very hard problems. And finally, reclaiming these first 3 terms, pattern recognition, collaboration, and design, suggests a new perspective on evolution, and that, in fact, our common conception of evolution is incomplete. Now, I'm not the only person who says that. I believe I have a unique argument, but there are a number of different arguments converging on that question. And the origin of life offers an example of why our current conception of evolution is incomplete. So, there's some significant possibilities here. Suppose the origin of life can shed light on evolution and its unpredicted futures, accelerating innovation and its unpredicted futures, emergence of intelligence and where it's headed. Suppose we find principles of collaboration and innovation and can learn about the creative process by examining the origin of life and how scientists form hypotheses about it. And suppose that these theoretical musings can give us some insight relevant to practical R&D challenges, such as designing effective collaboratory programs or evolving multi-agent systems able to learn and improve their performance. suppose that pattern recognition is fundamental and pervasive. So I'm going to talk about the origin of life as a window on evolution and our own problem-solving methods, and these 4 language presets: pattern recognition, collaboration, design, and evolution. Suggesting that we have taken some things for granted, that there are some incomplete assumptions that need extension. And I will say something about the theory of facilitated variation, which supports this argument, and about the paradox of prediction and a singular opportunity, and conclude by suggesting that the origin of life offers design principles and dynamics that are really relevant for current R&D challenges, such as design for robotics, multi-agent systems for missions into space, and eco-sustainability. There have been some valiant efforts to try to bring the myriad detailed research together into organizations that allow us to get an overview of this. And one of these is by Wanda Davis at NASA Ames, working with Chris McKay, to diagram the origins of life's hardware. But both she and Chris would agree that there is something that is off that chart. There have been many efforts to define life, several behavioral definitions of life, the physiological definition of life as a self-contained chemical system capable of functions like breathing, eating, reproducing. But then, of course, you have the mule, who is very much alive and cannot reproduce. The energetic definition of life as a system which exchanges materials with its surroundings, consuming energy in order to grow. But then there's fire, which is not alive. The informational definition, the ability to reproduce hereditary information. But Graham Cairns Smith, who started as an organic chemist, by the way, became fascinated with the highly ordered structure of kaolinite clay, which led him to his clay hypothesis for the origin of life. And even though that hasn't been widely accepted, in the process of studying kaolinite clay, he noted that Darwinian evolution was present. In other words, the random variation that occurred as clay was templating layer upon layer produced variations, some of which were selected by the environment because of optimal porosity to improve replicative or persistence of a particular clay. And so the fittest clays survived, which led Cairns Smith to question our fundamental assumption that evolution is a property of living things. So Cairns Smith hypothesized that evolution came first and invented life, which of course brings up the big question of, well, if evolution is a property also of some non-living things, and there was a smooth transition from non-life to life, what was that moment when this evolving something came to life?